The opinions expressed in the following video are not in their entirety endorsed by this podcast. They are instead the focus of our discussion today. This is your content warning.
7 reasons why I don't believe in God. Number 1, not enough evidence. If God were real and wanted me to know, wouldn't he provide better evidence than what we have? Look at the trees isn't good enough for me. Number 2, indoctrination. Most people on earth believe the same way that their parents do or the people around them do. Number 3, I can't make myself believe. We don't choose our beliefs. We either believe something or we don't, and I can't make myself believe no matter how many people tell me that I need to. Number 4, there are some truly awful things in this world. Why would a God allow world hunger and terminal illness in children if he's supposed to be good? Number 5, intelligent design is not so intelligent. Over 99% of the species who have ever lived on Earth are now extinct. Number 6, the Bible. If the Bible were the Word of God, wouldn't he make it more reliable? Wouldn't the Gospels have been written during Jesus' lifetime? And number 7, science. We learn more about the universe every day, and the God of the gaps is shrinking.
My father-in-law, Kirk Sam's diehard Tennessee fan.
Yeah,
he was just like glued
super
to the
familiar.
TV.
Kirk is one of my favorite people. I didn't realize that was your father-in-law. Kirk is one of my favorite people.
Yeah. So in my bracket, I have Tennessee and Duke in the final.
Well, there you go.
Duke beating Tennessee 75-67.
I fill out more than one bracket because I cheat. So I've got
those games start today, don't they?
I think so.
Yeah, I might fill out another one. I might fill out my realistic bracket.
Right. Well, I tell people all the time, I have a fandom bracket and then I have an actual bracket.
Right.
I've actually got Arizona winning the national championship as long as nobody cares about that. But anyway, Arizona's got so many phenomenal players and they play really efficient. So
yeah, it's so great. And we can get to stuff here in a little bit, but it's so crazy. Like teams like Arizona, like I would even say UCLA's got a decent chance, but it's like if you're a team on the West Coast, you just don't get a lot of love because all the media is on the East Coast.
It's very sad. Speaking of not getting a lot of love, Joshua, you haven't said 2 words, man. What's up?
I'm just so depressed. Tennessee is now a basketball school.
For real,
it just bothers me, man.
Why does that bother you?
They're a basketball.
I'm a football
school.
guy.
We'll say they're a basketball school. They're
going to be okay
school.
in football though. They just got to get a defense and they'll be good.
Man, hey, they haven't lost a rugby game in 845 days. So let's just throw that out there. They're rugby national champions right now.
All I know is rodeo season is about to start, and that's my sport. So holler at me in about July.
I always look forward to Tech's fishing team or angling team.
There you go. Yeah.
It's the only thing that – but I don't know. Tech sports is kind of taking a level up. Their softball team's ranked 6th. Their soccer team at one point is in the top 5.
AAC always has good soccer. I don't know what it is over there, but they're like Florida State, Maryland, Tech, Duke. Those schools always rep really big when it comes to soccer. Yeah. But anyway, guys, welcome back. This is super exciting. As always, I'm here. Joshua's here. And Joshua, we're tackling a topic today for the Content Warning podcast, right? A Biomedical Culture podcast where we break down modern theology versus biblical content. And we are breaking down a topic today that is so outside the realm of what I think a lot of people would say is normal that we had to bring in the big guns.
That's right.
And that is Dean Meadows.
Oh, my goodness.
Today. I'm a big fan of Dean. I met Dean. Dean, I guess I met you it was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. You gave a lecture at Bear Valley on street epistemology. It was one of the first times I met you. Currently at the Blacksburg Church of Christ, right, as the campus minister there.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're good.
My phone's already been ringing this morning, too.
We can edit that out.
Nah, it's all good. Campus minister at the Blacksburg Church of Christ. So like we just kind of talked about, Duke fan living in Virginia Tech territory. How long have you been there? You haven't been there that long though, have you?
I haven't been here that long. I've been here since August of 2021. So
very nice. Adjusting well.
Got 1 semester under me, and we're about at the halfway point for the spring semester. So we've got
so that's right. Are you on spring break
March,
right now?
April, and May. That students just got back from spring break. So
I got you. So busy
it's busy. I'm busy every single day with something going on at the campus, and I love it. it's a nice mix of what two things that I love, which is theology and apologetics, and those come together in a very real way.
Absolutely.
On a college campus. So
absolutely.
I'm right where I want to be, and I'm glad that the Lord has opened that door for me to be here.
That's awesome.
Fantastic.
And speaking of that, right? So Dean also wasn't a campus minister when I met you, but you were still working for, and explain to me, because I get mixed up. Do you work for, or did you start, or are you like the owner of? He works for a company called the Daily Apologist, right?
Right. So the Daily Apologist is a 501c3 nonprofit that I helped found back in 2016.
Gotcha.
And so when I met you, I was working there. At that time, it was part-time 4 years ago.
Okay.
And then I just recently transitioned out of full-time work for the Daily Apologist to do campus work, to take what, we were producing and taking to congregations, still go to congregations, but really want to implement that kind of stuff to students, because as we've seen poll after poll after poll, students in high school, they start to wane a little bit.
Yeah.
And then that waning is actually secured during those college years. So I figured, we need, I think I just, thought about it, prayed about it, and said, hey, the guy that has this skill set needs to be on a campus somewhere. And
for sure,
it was crazy how I got to Blacksburg one night. I was just looking out and just saying, hey, are there even any campus ministry jobs open? And I saw that there was one in Blacksburg, and I grew up in Virginia.
Okay.
And I was like, hey, let me, inquire about, this position. Kind of helped. I don't know if it helped or hindered me, but it kind of pushed me in that way, because on a very superficial level, I'm a Virginia Tech football fan. So it's like, hey, there you go. But no, the time here has been great, and the eldership here just sees the need for campus work, and I'm glad that they, allow me to do my thing. So
for sure, awesome. For sure. And you mentioned, college kids kind of wane in that particular area, and it's interesting because the video that we're looking at today, that you either listened to or heard already, or watched or heard already, is a guy who goes by the tag Jesus Unfollower, which is really interesting. And so I've watched several of his videos, not just the one that we've looked at today. And this is a guy who grew up in church in the South, like still lives down here, grew up in church in the South, and eventually got to the point in his life where he looked and he's like, you know what? None of this makes sense anymore. And he gives out here 7 reasons why he is no longer a Christian. We're going to try to break these down best we can. I know Dean is chomping at the bit because he's got so many things going on. But one of the things that I love about the Daily Apologist, and we'll give you guys as many plugs as you want. We'll put their link of everything in the description of these videos. But one of the things I love about it, and one of the things that I took most away from your lecture is that the way people interact with each other when it comes to apologetics has slowly shifted. That idea, I remember not your whole lecture, unfortunately, but a lot of the thing I remembered about the street epistemology thing is we're moving in a shift away from guys like Bill Nye that basically just come out and slam you for being stupid if you're a Christian, and how could you ever refute the science and this, that, and the other. And it's a much more, I'm not going to say casual, but it's a much more friendly, interactive kind of dialogue. And one of the things I love about the Daily Apologist is you guys really encourage those interactions. I think most of the people that comment, at least the things that I see, most of the people that comment on your stuff are actually probably atheists, if not at least half of the people.
Right. No, and that's what that's what I love about, what we do. And I think you're right as far as this shift goes. And so really what happened after 9/11, guys like Richard Dawkins, the late Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, they wrote a bunch of books, and they were very aggressive with the Christian audience. And so as culture has kind of shifted away from that aggressive tone to where maybe you need to be more concerned, tolerant, things like that. A guy by the name of Peter Boghossian, I think it was in 2012, wrote a book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. I wish he wouldn't, like sugarcoat the title and what he's after there, right? A manual for creating atheists. I wonder what he's trying to do.
Right.
No, and so what we try to say, or what we try to promote is that these dialogues are going to happen as culture moves and becomes more secular. Our youngest people and ourselves, even grown adults, when we have conversations about faith, it's no longer, hey, let's just open up the Bible and see who has the correct interpretation or what the correct interpretation is. It's, I don't even believe that thing's real. I mean, I see that you got ink on pages, but I don't think the things that you're saying took place actually took place, or I don't believe that God exists, or, you name it. And so the best thing for the church to do, in my, as they say in France, opinion, my opinion is that we should not shelter ourselves from those conversations and those topics. What we need to do is we actually need to engage those topics, engage that community after we've had training, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the key right there. And I think that's the biggest, just my opinion, I think that's one of the bigger missteps that we've made in the church. We've said, if I can I tell a story?
Yeah, go for it.
So what really kind of opened my mind up to this is that there's a friend of mine who grew up in the church, was involved in converting me, and then went off to school at a Christian school, reputable Christian school, got in with some friends who were taking philosophy classes, and I don't know if they were philosophy majors or minors, but they weren't Christians, and they started asking him some very serious questions, some objections that he never heard. And so he figured that he could go back home and he could ask his dad, who was a preacher, these questions. And his dad, ministered for however many years, and his dad would have the answer. And as they were conversing outside, they're actually working on a car together, he starts asking his dad these questions. And his dad looked at him and goes, "You need to stay away from that philosophy stuff." And I did an interview with him later while I was at Biola, a Worldview interview. And he said it was at that moment that I decided to leave Christianity, because my dad was telling me to run away from this stuff, where my friends were saying, you need to consider these things with regards to Christianity. So on one hand, you've got the preacher dad over here who says you need to run away, and over here essentially saying you don't need to worry about those answers. You need to run away from those things. But over here, you've got the skeptic friends who are philosophy majors or minors, don't know, and they've got answers. And so, I mean, he's still not a Christian today.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's totally because of these answers.
Right.
I'm sure there are other things that are involved.
Yeah.
But that is one of the things that young people who leave the church, I mean, will tell people all the time. Well, over here they don't have any answers. They tell us not to ask questions, and so we've become very insular in the church. We, with regards to these types of topics,
well,
we either don't address them, or the other piece of that. And I'm sorry to ramble here.
No, you're good.
Or the other piece of that is we become hyper aggressive. Towards the other side.
Well, so that was what I was going to say. It's one of those things that for some reason or another, for whatever, like I said, there could be a number of reasons. Growing up in the church like I did, apologetics seems to be like that epitome of daunting topic that it's just really, really hard. Like you've got apologetics and the Holy Spirit are those two things that like you sit there and fight over and argue, and you can't quite figure anything out. And then, and it was one of those things that it was easy to shrug off for a long time because, well, atheists were there was just a lack of faith, or they weren't going to believe no matter what you said. Or, atheists, on the other hand, would say that all religion is pseudoscience and logical fallacy. And it was just one of those things that for some reason or another, most Christians look at apologetics as kind of one of those big, daunting, for lack of a better term, let somebody else figure it out and give me what I'm supposed to say, as opposed to want to dive into it. And I think that's kind of where Jesus' unfollower is coming from. And a lot of the atheists on social media, at least from what I could tell, most of them were Christians who, for lack of a better term, deconstructed. And those are the ones that are putting out the majority of atheistic content.
I would agree with a lot of what you said there. Apologetics it does seem like for a lot of people in the church that in order for me to be an apologist, I need to have a PhD in philosophy. I need to have a PhD in science. I need to have a PhD in theology. I need to have all this background. But what we're trying to show at the Daily Apologist is, you can be, quote, a lay person, your average Christian, and still be effective in meeting the culture where they are so the gospel can change who they are. Right now on our team, there's not one person. Well, excuse me, there's one person, Dwayne Bryant, who writes for us and does some things for us. He's the only PhD that we have on the team. Everybody else, everybody else doesn't have a PhD, right? Not saying that won't change, but what I mean by that is, we have people who don't necessarily specialize like in apologetics. We got some specialists, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, you don't have to have a PhD to be an effective apologist. All apologetics is just giving a defense for why you believe what you believe.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And like anything else, there was a time where none of us were really good Bible students, right? We didn't know how to study the Bible. So what did we do? We took the time we invested to study. And so what this is going to require for parents, for youth ministers, for campus ministers, for preachers, is the culture is going to force us, whether we like it or not, to have to study this stuff.
Yep.
And if we go around and we say, well, that's for somebody else, that's why we have, the Daily Apologist. That's why we have AP. That's why we have the Warren Center. Well, then we are going to be in a world of hurt, because even if everybody at the Daily Apologist and the other two organizations I mentioned were to travel 300 or 52 weeks out of the year, they still wouldn't reach everybody that could possibly be reached. Right. So, one of the things that we're trying to do, with our online coursework, is my dream for us is that we make apologetics as simple and easy to understand and to put in your theological tool belt for at least one Christian in every congregation, so that they can train other Christians in this area. That's essentially why we do what we do. That's why we do the simple infographics that we do. That's why we have the coursework, stuff like that. But yeah, so that's a cheap, shameless plug for our mission and our goal. But to your point, this is where we are forced to be because of culture. And we can either fight that or we can just embrace that. And I would just say real quick before we get into the video, I would encourage elders that if you've got people in your congregation who are just craving that type of that's their wheelhouse, that's what they want to do, that's what they are the ones who say, I want to start a defenders class, or I want to start an apologetics class, or hey, I want to go get an education in this area so I can come back and train the church. I would encourage you to strongly, strongly consider allowing them to start that class and in some way, shape, or form monetarily fund that education. Yeah. It is an investment in the long run for the health of the church. So there's my soapbox, and I'll get off.
Oh, you're good, man. You're good. Well, you mentioned the video. We're going to get right into it. This guy gives 7 reasons why he doesn't believe in God. There's 7 reasons why he was a Christian. Now he's not. We're just going to run through them. And some of these we'll spend a little bit longer time on than others. But right off the bat, number 1, there's not enough evidence, right? Which is generally what the whole apologetics debate, for lack of a better term, kind of boils down to is the evidence, the burden of proof. and so on and so forth. And he makes the comment, if God existed, why didn't he give us better evidence or more clear evidence? And he makes the comment that, well, look at the trees is not good enough for him anymore.
I found that to be interesting because I would, in some aspect, I would agree that look at the trees is not enough. And that's just I think that's just a pejorative term that he's using.
Right.
And so the one way that we can be effective apologists is ask really good questions, right? I don't know who said it first, but a 10-cent question is better than $1 million opinion, right? Mm-hmm. So if someone comes to me, like Jesus Unfollower, and says, well, how come, there's not enough evidence? Okay, well, my next question would be, okay, well, what do you mean by enough evidence, right? Yeah. Or, if they say, well, how come God didn't make this evidence clearer? Okay, well, what do you mean by that? So if the evidence that we have right now isn't enough, what do you mean by that? Or if it's not clear enough, what do you mean by that? And then ask the question, well, what would be enough evidence, or what would make it clearer for you? And, for me personally, as I listened and saw the video, I just start running through the arguments that provide evidence for the existence of God. I mean, you've got the Kalam cosmological argument, you've got the fine-tuning argument, you've got the argument from consciousness, the argument from reason, the ontological argument. You've got the historical reliability of the New Testament. You've got the historical case for the resurrection. You've got the argument from reason. Those are 8 right there. I mean, that when I look at it, I say, okay, well, let's just for a split second look at the Kalam. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe begins to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Well, what about that? Doesn't what would be the objection there? Okay, well, even if the Kalam fails, which I don't think that it does, you still have got 7 other arguments that lay out evidence for the existence of God, and more specifically, the truth of the Christian worldview. So what if God were to say, all right, hey, I'm going to go ahead and write on the moon in Hebrew, Yahweh exists, and so you need to believe. I mean, would that do it?
Yeah.
Right. And so we see this also as a biblical example. I mean, how many times did one of my favorites is when Jesus feeds the 5,000, and then in John, and then the very next chapter, I believe it's John chapter 6, in the very next chapter, they go out and they find Jesus and they say, Master, when did you get here? And he says, hey, you didn't come here because essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, you didn't come here for the spiritual lesson, you came because your bellies were full. And then the very next question they ask is, well, what sign do you do so that we might believe? Well, didn't they just see him like feed 5,000 people? So I don't want to I don't want to put words or put intentions on Jesus Unfollower that doesn't give. But I would ask him, if he sees this video, I would ask him, okay, well, you've said that there's not enough evidence. My question would be, what evidence, what more, what would make evidence more clear, or what type of evidence would you accept for Christianity to be true or for God to exist? And let's have a conversation, about that.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
and
go ahead. Well,
no, you gotta go ahead.
Well, okay, yeah. So, this is my thing when it comes to like the idea of apologetics and having these conversations. A lot of times, what I find is more times than not, occasionally you're going to find somebody and you get a really, really positive interaction. More times than not, a lot of times what I find in these particular interactions is Christians will give their evidence, and then atheists will say, well, this is why that evidence doesn't make sense, and here's my evidence to disprove your evidence, and then here's more evidence to disprove the evidence that you just gave to disprove my evidence. And so you keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And at some point, I think both sides have to ask, okay, at what point are we going to agree that because it's one of those type things that it's difficult, especially with the access to information that we have now, is you can find anybody that'll say anything about anything that agrees with what I think,
right.
and vice versa. So it's one of those things that the idea of having clear evidence, I agree with you. Don't get me wrong. I completely agree with what you're saying. The idea of, okay, how much evidence would be enough, or what can make evidence more clear? The problem is that is such a gray realm, because everybody sees that differently, that it becomes really difficult to get past that. Because I watched, it was a very last second video that I think that you did not too terribly long ago on a YouTube channel, on an atheist YouTube channel. And it was very much it felt as though you guys were doing a great job interacting with one another, but it felt like you were giving evidences and he was like, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense, and here's why. And you're like, well, okay, but yeah, but what I said still makes sense because here's why. And it very, I don't, how do we avoid that, I guess, is one of those things when you talk about how there's not enough evidence. Because we'll get to this in a second. You can't make people accept the evidence that's there, right?
Right. So it seems like in some situations or some circumstances, we have to understand that, and I'm not saying that this is the case with Jesus Unfollower. There are certain situations, circumstances where it doesn't matter what arguments I lay out. The person just won't accept that. Right. And so what I have to do is I have to be considerate. I have to be humble. I have to discern and say, okay, it seems like we have filtered through all of the possible explanations for this particular argument for God. And this person is accepting it. I seem to believe that I have adequately answered their objections. And so at this point, it's just a matter of, do I continue down this road, or do I say, okay, hey, when it comes to this particular argument, let's say we're talking about the fine-tuning argument of the universe. When it comes to fine-tuning, I've laid this out. You've responded. I've responded to that. And we've traveled as far as we can go. It just seems like we're at an impasse. I wish you the best. I hope that at some point, you would come to a knowledge of the truth, or that, we have to be honest with ourselves. Maybe there's something that I'm missing. I hope that if there is something I'm missing, I see that and adjust, whether that's, finding a solution for that, for Christianity to be true based upon, or at least God's existence to be true based on fine tuning, or give up the fine tuning argument and just say, hey, we've traveled this road as far as we can go. And, it's just best that we just agree to disagree here. I think that's one way to look at that, to handle those types of situations. But two, I would also say that as long as the other person is willing to engage, honestly, genuinely, that to keep that door open and just keep examining the argument. So, for instance, you're talking with somebody and the conversation's going well, and it does seem like, hey, I'm offering something, they're offering objection, I'm answering their objection, they're offering another objection. It's okay to go ahead and mine that field, because it's going to cause you to think more. It's going to cause the other person to think more. And at the end of the day, it just helps me examine this particular argument for the existence of God. And what I've found is that as I do that, I find that, so for instance, my favorite argument is the Kalam argument. I found that no matter what objection is brought to it, as I mine it, even things that I don't even I've never seen before, it just holds up, and so that gives me more tools in my tool belt. It allows me to think more about that, and it draws me, at the end of the day, it draws me closer to God. So I don't know that there's a fail safe for those types of situations, right, where you're just going down the rabbit hole, but just treat those situations with discernment and humility, and kind of know, okay, it seems like we've gone as far as we can. I need to move on. Right? Yeah. So, I don't know if that helped.
No, I agree with that completely. It's one of those
things. But you're just not going to be able, in certain situations, you're just not going to be able to convince everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus didn't convince 100% of the people, right?
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest problems that we run into, and I say we, like the collective religious we or whatever, I think one of the problems that we run into is I think far too many of us are content to go, well, we'll just agree to disagree and we'll go our separate ways. And we don't like putting forth that effort, which is not, in my opinion, not a great mentality to have anyway. It's one of those things that when I worked with as a youth minister, one of the things that I tried to get our high school students to really buy into is do everything you possibly can to not leave a conversation without the possibility of a follow-up. Right. Regardless of what the topic was. So that was, I love that. And like I said, there's go follow the Daily Apologist right now if you want a breakdown of every single one of those arguments that Dean just laid out. We just don't have time for it right now.
Right.
But yeah, so we'll get him. Number two. So that's number one, is that there's not enough evidence, and there's plenty of evidence out there, and that's why we brought Dean on. Number two, though, he said is indoctrination. This is why he doesn't believe in God, is because indoctrination, he said, bottom line is most parents just believe what their parents do. And I don't disagree with that, right? Most humans have been given a set of beliefs that eventually grow and mold over time. Now, and here's how I would say this, because I've watched several videos on this. Atheists would argue that it's only indoctrination when you force somebody to believe something, right? That the idea of growing up in an atheistic household is not indoctrination, because we're not teaching anything. We're just living. And we're not accepting the existence of something that in their arguments doesn't exist. They said religion, on the other hand, is indoctrination, because you're forcing your beliefs upon somebody else. In a sense that doesn't. And so there's a little bit, I would say there's a little bit of truth there, in the sense that most people, in my opinion, most people believe what their parents believe up until a certain point, up until they go, okay, look, now I disagree with what my parents said about this, quote unquote. Joshua and I have joked on here several times. I actually don't know if we've joked on this while we've been recording or not, but we're both far more, we're far different people and our beliefs and our faith than we were when we were still living at home. I'll put it that way.
Right.
Yeah. I wondered though, like the whole indoctrination thing, a lot of times people talk about it in the realm of Christianity, but would you only limit it to the realm of Christianity? What about our Muslim friends or our Hindu friends or our Buddhist friends, things like that? Is it
what
just
about in the realm of politics?
Yeah.
We tell people that they're indoctrinated because of politicians all the time.
Well, the thing about this
argument, look at the time. No, I'm just kidding.
The thing about this argument is we all learn something from someone, and Christians have a charge to pass on our faith. There is an element in which that faith, I think, should become your own, and you should develop it yourself and study it yourself, but you learn it from somewhere. And I heard a story the other day of a guy, he's an African-American guy, but he goes to KKK rallies in hopes of having conversations with Klan members. You guys may know who I'm talking about. I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
I need to meet him though, because that's my type of dude right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story, but he says, I don't get in fights, I don't argue or anything, but my goal is to change their perspective, because their perspective is they hate me before they even meet me. Right. And so it's like taking a kid to a magic show and seeing the magician do this trick, and the kid's saying, "You won't believe what this magician did." But when you explain, which ruined the childhood of this kid, but if you explain how those things take place, my headphones always fall out when I record. But if you explain how that takes place, you've changed the perspective, and the reality of that child has become different. And so I think that's the challenge as we talk about indoctrination and stuff. You're not forcing your beliefs on anyone, but the challenge is to change a perspective and let that perspective become reality.
Yeah, I think you've made a good point there. I would say this, just holding my parents' belief is not technically indoctrination, because what indoctrination actually is, it's the process of teaching a person or maybe even a group of people to accept a particular belief. How would I say it? To accept a particular belief uncritically, right? So, and that's what indoctrination is. So even if I hold my parents' faith, as long as I have examined that critically, then I'm not indoctrinated, right? I haven't. Now, when we say things like, what is indoctrination is if I were to tell my oldest daughter, Nora, who's 5 years old, and she comes with me to church, she goes to events, and then at 13, 14, and 15, she's got questions like, "Hey, Dad, how do you know that God exists?" And I say, "You need to be quiet. You need to just accept that." Well, she's asking a critical question, and I'm telling her to believe this without asking that question. That's indoctrination. So here's the thing. The shoe, what the old term is, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, right? Well, if that is good for Christianity, then it seems like it would also be good for what we call cradle atheists, people who grow up in a secular home without any religious belief. If their parents are saying, God doesn't exist, or Christianity is untrue, or Jesus didn't rise from the grave, and they're doing that, and they're not allowing their son or daughter to examine those claims critically, then they're just as guilty of indoctrination, right? And then I guess the second thing that I would say here is that Jesus and followers saying, well, people hold their parents' belief. Most people hold their parents' belief, but that doesn't do anything to prove or negate the truth value, the truth claim of Christianity. This is what we call a genetic fallacy in philosophy, where we say that something is only true solely on the basis of where it came from and the means and the source by which it came. So he's saying essentially, well, you're a Christian because you grew up in mommy and daddy's house, and their mommy and they grew up in mommy and daddy's house. So of course, the only thing that would ever be is Christian. Well, even if that's true, that I grew up in a Christian home, therefore I'm more likely to adopt Christianity, that does nothing to say whether or not Christianity is actually true or false. Right. So two things here with this particular point. One, indoctrination can take place in a religious household, and it can take place in a non-religious household. And then two, just because one might have a belief based upon the time and the place and the person that they got it from, does nothing to impede the truth claim of Christianity. So maybe give another example. Let's say someone said, well, the only reason that Christianity is around is because people made up this belief out of fear. Well, okay, well, even if the belief in somebody originated because of fear, that does nothing to tell us whether or not that particular belief is actually true or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
at least it does to us anyway. I hope. Yeah. Right. I hope it makes sense.
So let me use just a crazy example. Let's say I said, I believe that there's a pink elephant over here on the right side of the room, because if I don't believe that, then I'm scared that an elephant might actually trample me. Okay, well, that belief has arisen out of fear, but just because that belief has arisen out of fear does nothing to show whether or not an actual pink elephant is in the room over to the right. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. I'm really curious now. I'm not going to ask you to turn your camera around, but now I'm really curious because
there is no pink elephant in the room.
So I thought
examine the evidence, but yeah.
So I thought that might have been a mind trick.
So two things. Oh, sorry.
No, I thought that might have been a mind trick. I know you've got kids, so I didn't know if there was like a stuffed animal pink elephant over in the corner.
Right. So the origin of a belief does nothing to impede the truth value of a belief. And indoctrination can happen on both ends of the spectrum. So
absolutely, and that's just one of those things that it's kind of thing it's not necessarily easy to get around, because fighting indoctrination is different than growing up with a critical look at your own faith and beliefs, and looking at what the Bible says. And I think, don't get me wrong, I think that there is indoctrination on both sides. But I don't think you can do a broad brushstroke and say, well, all religion is indoctrination, period.
Right. And maybe this is another practical point and a plug for apologetics in general. Why does unfollower Jesus feel like that is a good argument against the church? Why does he feel like that's a good argument against Christianity or religion in general? Well, maybe because he grew up and I don't know this, I'm just speculating.
Right,
maybe he grew up and he saw that, right?
Right.
He saw that, even in the latest Barna poll about Gen Z, one of Gen Z's biggest criticisms of church in general, regardless of denominational background, is church isn't a place where we can ask questions.
Yep. Yeah, which is unfortunate, and something that I don't believe was the intention by any stretch. But it's sad. So that's point number 2, is that the idea of indoctrination. Number 3 he gives here is I can't make myself believe. You can't choose. He says, I think he phrases it that you can't choose what you believe, no matter how many times people say, well, you just need to believe this. He's like, I can't make myself believe. And I think the easiest argument around that is we're not asking you to make yourself believe. I think what we're asking is look at the evidence that is there, right? And critically examine it, and look at it in a sense of trying to be as unbiased as possible. That's not forcing yourself to believe something. That's trying to critically examine what is there for your benefit.
And one of the hardest things to do when you approach something to study is approaching it objectively and letting what you find dictate your opinion. Like, I run into this all the time writing articles and papers and stuff, because I go into it with a preconceived notion, with that presupposition of what I want to be true. And then there are times where that is, upheld by the research. And then there's other times where it just completely falls. And I'm forced to change my mind because the objective material is pointing in that direction. Like, that's what happened with my master's thesis. I went into it with a particular belief, and 112 pages later, I had to rewrite my conclusion because I found out that what I had originally thought was wrong, or at least from the research that I did. So we're not, it's like Nathan said, we're not asking people to go in with a preconceived idea that I'm going to believe. We're saying, let's look at the evidence, let's evaluate it as objectively as we can, and see where the evidence takes us. Because that kind of circles back to the first point about there's not enough evidence. Well, why don't we handle the evidence that we do have, and then let's see what that presents to us.
Right. So much here in just that one comment. I can't make myself believe things no matter how many times people say that I need to. I would say that there is what I would say a involuntary aspect of belief. In other words, if someone came to me and said, I'll give you $1 million to believe that there is a pink elephant in the right side of the room, well, I just can't take that deal because, from that perspective, for that situation, like, that's just not the case, right? But there's also what I call a voluntary part of belief, in that as long as we have the ability to choose, well, then there is a way in which we, and in some sense, we do choose what we believe. But that, as you've said, is based on good reasoning. Are there good reasons for me to believe that this particular thing or this particular proposition is true? And so it almost seems, just looking at the video, and I don't know if Jesus Unfollower means this or not, I hope he's not taking a strictly deterministic approach to belief. What I mean by that is, well, I'm just wired the way that I'm wired, and there's no way that I could believe A, B, C, or D because that's just the way that I'm wired. I think that is just categorically not true. And if he is taking that route, then he's got some serious problems in other areas of life. Not saying that he himself does. I'm just saying the way in which he will come to conclusions about, say, like morality. Well, if I just am the way that I am, and I choose to believe the way that I believe, and I can't be made to believe what I believe, well, then what about some of the moral conflicts that may happen? That kind of gets into a whole different area. But there is a sense of an involuntary sense of not being able to choose to believe. But there is this other piece of the puzzle of, based upon evidence and reason, I can choose to believe that. So, and a lot of things go into this. Once again, I'm not trying to pin down Jesus unfollower in a particular way, but why would someone not choose to believe that Christianity is true? Well, maybe they're not convinced by the evidence. That's one possible way. Maybe they have what's called cognitive dissonance. They're going to be secular, and they don't want to believe in God no matter how much evidence you put in front of them. Or maybe there's some other factor there that I haven't mentioned. So, I would agree with him that he shouldn't. Actually, I would agree with him. He shouldn't believe Christianity is true just because a bunch of people tell him that that he should. He should believe that Christianity is true because it's true. And so I would love to have that conversation about, why do you say this here in that video. So good points you guys made too as well.
Yeah, it's super interesting thing too, because I think a lot of times I don't know that we put as much emphasis on, Joshua, you talked about how with your master's thesis that you went into something with an intention and you ended up having to change your mind. And that's not necessarily an easy process on something as I'm not trying to offend you, but on something as trivial as a master's thesis.
Oh, I'm so offended.
Sorry. When you're talking about something like this, you're talking about trying to convince somebody to examine evidence and change their mind about basically the entire way they view life, and their life and purpose and all of these different things. That's a really, really big deal.
Yeah.
And it's not something that people do lightly. It's not something that people do easily. And so I think that a lot of times people, I don't want to say that we're too cavalier, but I think sometimes we don't necessarily, that the weight of that decision isn't ever in the back of our mind, right? I don't think a lot of times, as Christians, because we view it as a defense of our faith, right? Nobody's asking us necessarily to change what we believe. We're just being asked to defend or provide proof. And I think a lot of times the weight of, okay, somebody's asking me to change my entire way of viewing everything in my life, and how much that would affect us and how resistant we might be. And again, there's examining evidence and believing in truth because it holds up. And then there's, but just getting into that mindset of what we're asking of people. Because I think sometimes we just go, well, just look at the evidence. It's plain as day. Just look at the evidence. It holds up. And the weight of just change your entire, like if we were to phrase it, just change the entire way you look at life and shift your entire morals and purpose system. I think that might play more of a role in how we approach people when it comes to, and again, it might make a little bit more sense to us why somebody would say, well, I can't make myself believe that. Sometimes it's that natural resistance to, that's a really, really big change. And I don't want to, or I can't, or whatever the case may be. Bless you.
Excuse me. I think on that same note, this kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. We forget that conversations like this they don't produce change overnight. At least very rarely do they produce change overnight. It's a constant thing. It may take months, it may take years. I mean, who knows? So it's just one of those things that we try to pursue and not give up on.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Nathan said something that I found interesting when we say things like, well, if you would just change your worldview, or if you say something like, well, the evidence is right there, I can't believe you wouldn't be a Christian. That's like walking up to somebody who's believes something doctrinally incorrect and said, well, if you would just read your Bible, it's there, right? It's very, very cavalier, very nonchalant, very, very arrogant. So I think once again, we keep coming back to this. The way in which I approach people definitely matters. So yes. Good points there as well.
For sure. All right, guys, we've got 10 minutes left. So we're going to hit one more. And then, so I'm just going to go ahead. We're going to make the call right mid podcast. This is going to be a 2-parter because there's so much great stuff here. I'm going to rope Dean into coming back again to do part 2 of this. We're going to talk about one more point here. And then we'll hit the final 3 in part 2. We might actually split even this part into 2 parts, but we're going to talk about number 4 here. He talks about how the 4th reason he can't believe in God, or he doesn't, or whatever the case may be, is that there's too much evil and suffering in the world. He can't get into the mindset of how this all perfect, all good God would allow terminal illness in children and worldwide starvation, all these, the worst things that the world has to offer. He can't buy into that. And I'll be honest, this is me being as vulnerable as I can be. If there's one, what I'm going to call decent argument against the existence of an all-powerful, all-good God, to me, it's the argument of evil and suffering. And I believe that there's ways to combat that, but I believe this is probably the only viable argument that there is to, if you're going to choose to not believe in a God, this is probably the foundation of where you stand.
It is probably the number one reason why people leave religion, why people leave Christianity. And once again, if you look at the newest or the most recent Barna poll about Gen Z, the number one reason why Gen Zers who would classify as Christians leave is because of the problem of evil, the problem of evil, pain, and suffering, which before we get into that, just as we do apologetics, we need to argue where people are, right? So right now, there's a lot of conversation about sex, gender, and identity going on in culture. And so if that's the thing, or a thing that's popular, then we don't need to make arguments that or we don't need to go to somebody who's struggling with the problem of evil, pain, and suffering in their Christianity and argue for something that was the issue 50 years ago, right? We need to meet people where they are. And so admittedly, on a college campus, in a youth group, at a hospital, this is the argument. And so there's a couple of ways to approach this. There's at least 3 types of arguments from the problem of evil. The first one is the logical problem of evil, that God and evil are logically contradictory. The second one is what we call the evidential problem of evil, that given the amount of suffering in the world, it is probably true that God does not exist. And then the third one is what's called the emotional problem of evil, that regardless of the logic, that regardless of the evidence, there is something emotionally about what has just transpired that causes me to say God doesn't exist. All right. So those are kind of the 3 big pieces to the problem of evil. Now, the logical problem of evil, it's simply saying, is it logically possible for there to be an all-loving, all-knowing God and evil to exist? And I think that there is. And here's why. Because I think the way that it's always been laid out is, if God is all loving, then he would stop evil. If God is, or if God is all loving, he wouldn't want evil to exist. If God is all powerful, then he could stop it, but evil exists. Therefore, God does not exist. Well, the atheist here is making a couple of assumptions. First, he's assuming that God can just create whatever world that he wants to create. Well, given free will, that limits the type of world that God could create. All right. So if God says, I want to create a world in which human creatures are free to be in a relationship with me in which they choose to be with me, right? Because love, which is the highest ethic, requires choice, right? Or are either one of you married?
Yes.
You're both married? Okay, so when you asked your wife to marry you, did you hold a gun to her head and say, will you marry me? Or else I'll pull the trigger, right?
I was standing awfully close to the edge of a bridge, but no.
All right, there you go. but think about this for a second. You could hold the gun to her head and say, will you marry me? Or I'll pull the trigger. Well, she might say yes, but nobody would ever say, man, she made a free will choice to marry that guy. No, she was forced to marry that guy because there was a gun to her head, right? That's completely different than you removing the gun from her head and saying, hey, I love you. I care for you. I want you to be my wife. And she says, yes. That's a free will choice. Love requires that choice. And so if God wants creatures to come into a relationship with him freely by choosing love, then he has to create a world where not only they have the choice to love him and choose to love him, but also to have the choice to reject him, right? And in that rejection comes the consequence of evil, pain, and suffering. So God has good reasons to allow that suffering in order to allow free will and the choice to love him. Also, well, God's all powerful. He can make whatever world that he wants. Well, that comes back to, does God want free creatures that choose, or does God want robots? Right. And so the other piece of this puzzle is that God wants he desires that all people come to a knowledge of the truth and know him. And so God also knows what it would take for you and me to come into a knowledge of the truth. Well, maybe he knows that the only way that some people are going to come into a knowledge of the truth is if they feel the pain of evil, pain, and suffering. I can just give an anecdotal story real quick. I would argue that I would have never met my wife had my brother-in-law, who's now my brother-in-law, not got osteosarcoma at the age of 21. He gets osteosarcoma at the age of 21. She's outside the church, mad at the world. She comes home to see him. We connect. We become friends. We end up getting married. Well, how did all that take place? Well, that whole scenario doesn't take place without some pain and suffering, right? She didn't come back to the church without some pain and suffering. Even look at the text of Scripture. God fulfilled the greatest work that he could have ever fulfilled in saving you and me from our sins through evil, pain, and suffering. Evil men caused pain and suffering of Jesus. And then you look at Acts chapter 1, right? Jesus says, you're going to be my witnesses in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem, throughout all the world. Well, how does that initially take place? Well, in Acts chapter 7, Stephen's stoned. Acts chapter 8, what happens? There's a persecution that breaks out of the church. And what does it say there in the text? That they then went into Samaria and Judea. So God allowed this evil, pain, and suffering to take place so that the church might grow. And I know it might be a hard pill to swallow, but it could be that in order for the maximum number of people to come into a relationship with God, suffering must take place, must be allowed. All right. I know that's like drinking from a fire hose, and we can get more in depth into that, but that is essentially the deconstruction of the logical problem of evil.
Yeah.
All right. And we can get into the evidential and other stuff in another episode, because if we go into that, we'll be here for another 30 to 40 minutes.
Well, I was about to say, I don't want to hold you up anymore. I know we're sitting right at that 1 hour mark, and we are going to break this down to 2 parts. So we might flush some more of this out in part 2 for sure. But yeah, I love what you said. So part of the program that I'm in right now, I actually just got done taking a class on suffering in the human condition. And why that the world we live in is the perfect world for the purposes of soul making, and why that epistemic distance has to exist, and why that kind of plays a big role.
What class are you in?
It was a class called Suffering in the Human Condition. I'm doing a program right now at Freed, where I'm in the Pastoral Care and Counseling masters. So that's one of the classes. They teach us all about. They make us really, really depressed at the very beginning of the program, and then try to build us up the rest of the way.
There you go.
But anyway, so yeah, guys, stay tuned for part 2. We're gonna flush out some more of these things. Those are the first 4 that we talked about. That there's not enough evidence. Indoctrination, you can't make yourself believe, and we'll flush a little bit more of evil and suffering out when we come back next time. There's 3 more that I'm not even going to hint at, because I want you guys to come back that much, but we are going to do this in a part 2. I hope that we can get this in. This will release just one day after this part 2 will release one day after this particular video releases. Dean, thank you so much for being on, man. I'm super excited that you're here. I'm going to have you back on again for part 2 of this. Any last final shameless plugs that you want to put in? Yeah,
shameless plugs. Check us out on social media. There's a lot of really good conversations going on Facebook. Our website has we got an amazing team, amazing videos, great social media presence. Also, we will be at Connect Conference in June. That'll be at the Creve Hall Church of Christ in June. Let me see when that is real quick.
That's Nashville, right?
That's Nashville.
Right. Tennessee, for those who are listening around the world. Josh, say something. I think your microphone is off. We're having technical issues.
So
no, it's on. I've got it muted because I'm over here with phones ringing and everything else.
It's okay. I just didn't want Joshua to start talking on video and nobody hear him. So.
So we'll be at Connect Conference this. I think it says, I don't know if it's June or July. I'll get back to you on part 2, but
yeah, we're good.
I'll be there. I'll be doing a session there at the Connect Conference on tactics for defending your faith. And then I'll also be at Polishing the Pulpit in August to do a session for those of you who are in college, but also teens as well. And we also, and this is the shameless of the shameless plugs right here. We also don't mind if people want to donate to help us reach people, reach the atheist community, train Christians, young people, parents in apologetics. We'd love to come to whatever congregation you're at and do a seminar to whet the palate and then get you into those free online courses at thedailyapologist.com.
Sounds awesome. By the way, Connect Conference, I just looked it up. I think it's July 27th through the 30th, 2022, according to what they
said. Be there.
So you can do that. I'm pretty sure you guys are on Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok, right? Did you guys officially set up the TikTok?
Yeah, we just started a TikTok. We did a little response to Matt Dillahunty, who critiqued one of our arguments from the contingency of the universe for the existence of God. And it was a quick response. I hope that me and Matt can dialogue at some point in the future. So I look forward to that.
Go. Perfect. Well, that is all for part 1. Josh, do you have anything else before we leave?
And just glad that Dean got to be with us and appreciate all of his thoughts and comments. Look forward to part 2.
It made sense.
Nah, it's all absolutely wonderful. Stay tuned, guys, for part 2. I'm excited about this. This is one of those videos that we're like, you know what? We'll do this all in one sitting. And then it's like, you know what? I don't think that's possible. There's so much good stuff here. And so I know, I think the last thing I watched Dean on was actually like a 4-hour video that you sat on YouTube with a guy just answering questions, like live questions. So Dean is used to these long sessions. Me and Joshua, on the other hand, not so much. But anyway, so guys, stay tuned for part 2. We're going to go over the rest of these 7 reasons why God doesn't exist, why you shouldn't believe in God, and why those are not necessarily good reasons. Until then, Again, check out the Daily Apologist. You can find all of our content by going to Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, basically anywhere you find your podcast, and searching for the Content Warning Podcast. Until then, guys, appreciate you guys listening.